There is a version of this story where a young woman from Quezon City plays a nice, respectable career, wins a few matches, makes her country proud, and quietly fades into the record books as one of the good ones. That version does not exist anymore. Somewhere between a semi-final in Miami and a stunned center court crowd at Wimbledon, Eala tore that story up and wrote a different one. One where a 21-year-old from a country that has never produced a top-level tennis star just kept doing things no Filipino, man or woman, had ever done before. By the middle of 2026, the list of firsts next to her name had grown so long that even lifelong boxing fans who had never watched a tennis match in their lives knew who she was. And when Manny Pacquiao, the single most decorated athlete the Philippines has ever produced, sat down for a television interview and said, unprompted, that he was proud of her, it confirmed something that had been building for months. This wasn't a nice story anymore. This was history. So how did a player who was ranked outside the world's top 100 barely 2 years ago end up shaking hands with a princess, beating a Wimbledon champion, and hearing her name mentioned in the same breath as the Philippines' greatest sporting legends? That's what we're breaking down. To understand why Eala's rise feels so seismic, you have to understand how long Philippine tennis had been waiting for a moment like this. For decades, the sport simply wasn't part of the national conversation. Basketball owned the gyms, boxing owned the headlines, and tennis produced the occasional promising junior who never quite broke through to the level that mattered. No Filipino had ever won a Grand Slam main draw singles match in the professional era. No Filipino had ever been seeded at a major. The idea of a homegrown player cracking the WTA's top 30 felt less like a long shot and more like a fantasy nobody bothered entertaining. Eala's own path started the way a lot of these stories do, with a family that believed early. She left home as a young teenager to train at the Rafael Nadal Academy in Mallorca, Spain, trading a normal childhood for early mornings on clay courts thousands of miles from Manila. It's the kind of decision that looks obvious in hindsight and terrifying in the moment. 4 years, her progress was measured in junior titles and quiet steps up the rankings ladder, respectable, promising, but nowhere near the kind of headline-grabbing breakthrough that changes a nation's relationship with a sport. That changed in the spring of 2025. As a wild-card entrant at the Miami Open, one of the most competitive non-Grand Slam events on the calendar, Eala didn't just win a match or two. She beat Madison Keys, a former Grand Slam champion, and then beat Iga Swiatek, one of the best players of her generation, back-to-back. She became the first Filipino to reach a WTA 1000 semifinal and the first to crack the world's top 100. It was, by any reasonable measure, the single biggest result in Philippine tennis history. And it was only the beginning. What made that Miami run so jarring wasn't just the names on the scoreboard, it was the fact that almost nobody outside hardcore tennis circles had been tracking her closely up to that point. She had spent 2023 and 2024 doing the unglamorous work that never trends, grinding through ITF events, picking up ranking points a few dozen at a time, absorbing losses that toughened her without ever making headlines back home. Later that same year, she added another marker to her resume, becoming the first Filipina to record a main draw win at a Grand Slam when she won a match at the US Open, a smaller headline than Miami, but another brick in a foundation that, at the time, most people assumed was still years away from producing anything this significant. What makes Eala's story unusual isn't just that she had one great tournament. Plenty of young players catch fire for a week and disappear back into the pack. What separates her is the pace at which she kept adding to the pile. Her year-end ranking in 2025 sat at a career-high number 50, already a milestone no Filipino had touched. Then 2026 started, and instead of settling into that new level, she kept climbing. In January, barely 2 weeks into the new year, she reached the semifinals of the ASB Classic in Auckland and rose to a new career high of world number 49. A month later, she was in the quarterfinals in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, and in Dubai specifically, she pushed through wins over Hailey Baptista, Jasmine Paolini, and Serena Sursti before falling to Coco Gauff, a run good enough to draw a public message of pride from Manny Pacquiao himself, who told a Philippine broadcaster that watching her play made him proud to see her carrying the Philippine flag, and that the country needed more athletes like her. March brought an even bigger jump. Eala entered the month ranked number 32, more than 100 spots higher than where she had stood exactly 1 year earlier, and then climbed again, hitting a career-high number 29 following a fourth-round run at Indian Wells, one of the most prestigious non-major tournaments in the sport. For context, 12 months earlier she had been ranked outside the top 130. Few players in the modern game have compressed that kind of climb into a single year. Then came the part of the season every young athlete dreads, the slump. April and May were rough. She lost early in Linz, in Stuttgart, and in Madrid. At the Italian Open in Rome, she ran into a red-hot Elena Rybakina and couldn't find her footing on the clay. At the French Open, she exited in the first round to Iga Swiatek. For a few weeks, the conversation around her shifted from, how high can she go, to, was the spring just a hot streak? That's a familiar pattern in tennis. Young players get one unforgettable run, the tour adjusts, and the results quietly fade. It's exactly what critics expected to happen to Eala too. Instead, she answered on the surface that suited her best. Clay had exposed her weaknesses. Grass revealed her strengths. When the tour shifted to the short grass court season in June, something clicked. She won the Birmingham Open, her second WTA 125 level title, and followed it by reaching the semi-finals in Berlin, where she did something almost no one saw coming. She beat two top 10 players back-to-back, taking down Elena Rybakina, the same player who had dismantled her weeks earlier in Rome, and then Alina Svitolina. Former world number 4 Greg Rusedski, watching from the commentary booth, called the run extremely impressive and pointed to her left-handed game as a genuine weapon on grass, predicting it was only a matter of time before she broke through even further. Those results pushed her ranking to a new career high of world number 28 adjacent territory heading into the sport's biggest stage, and with it came a milestone that had never happened before in Philippine sporting history. Because the WTA rankings released on June 22 put her at world number 30, Eala entered Wimbledon as the tournament's number 29 seed. That made her the first player from the Philippines, not just the first woman, the first player, period, to ever be seeded at a Grand Slam singles tournament. What she did with that seeding turned an already historic achievement into something bigger. In her first-round match, she beat Mexico's Renata Zarazua in straight sets, becoming the first Filipino to win a singles main draw match at Wimbledon in the Open era, a period of professional tennis stretching back to 1968. In the second round, she got revenge on Australia's Maya Joint, the player who had beaten her in a final the year before, coming back from a set down to win in 3. And then, in the third round, she produced the signature win of her career so far, a 7-6, 6-2 victory over defending Wimbledon champion Iga Swiatek, a result that instantly became the biggest upset of the tournament and sent Eala into the fourth round, a stage no Filipino had ever reached at a major. Her run finally ended against 13th seed Jasmine Paolini, but by then the damage to the record books was already done. She climbed 4 more spots in the rankings, reaching a new career high of world number 28, a number that, 24 months earlier, would have sounded like science fiction for Philippine tennis. Along the way, off the court, she met Catherine, the Princess of Wales, took photos with royalty, and became a fixture of British tennis media coverage for 2 straight weeks. When she got home, the reception matched the scale of what she'd done. A presidential citation from Ferdinand Marcos Jr. at Malacanang, a sponsor event packed with executives eager to celebrate her, and a public welcome home gathering in Taguig where fans and celebrities turned out just to see her in person. Here's the part of the story that doesn't get talked about enough. None of this erased the skepticism. If anything, every leap forward invited a new round of it. After Miami in 2025, people asked if it was a fluke. After the Rome loss, people asked if the wheels were coming off. After Wimbledon, the question shifted again, not whether she belonged, but whether she could sustain this level against players who now scout her every match with real seriousness, aware that she's capable of taking down a Grand Slam champion on a given afternoon. That's actually a healthy sign, not a warning sign. Tennis analysts have pointed out repeatedly that Eala's game doesn't look like a one-tournament fluke because the wins keep coming from different opponents, different surfaces, and different stages of the season. A left-handed aggressive baseliner who thrives at the net, she has now beaten a top 2 player in Rybakina, a former world number 1 and defending Wimbledon champion in Swiatek, and multiple other ranked opponents across a calendar year that also included real slumps. Players who are purely riding luck don't typically bounce back from a 6-0, 6-1 style beatdown by beating the defending Grand Slam champion a few weeks later. Consistency across adversity is usually the strongest evidence that a breakthrough is real. What also stands out is how she's handled the losses. By her own account, and by the reporting around her, she doesn't spend much time publicly relitigating a bad result. After tough losses during the clay swing, she went back to work instead of offering excuses, something that reporters and former players covering her have specifically pointed to as a sign of the discipline instilled during her years training in Spain. That kind of even-keeled response to failure is often what separates athletes who have one great year from athletes who build entire careers. Even her own words after a rough Wimbledon-adjacent stumble reflected that mindset. She has said plainly that everyone has days where their best tennis doesn't show up, and that the job is to keep moving forward rather than dwell on it. That's not a small thing for a 21-year-old carrying the expectations of an entire country every time she steps on court. The pressure on Eala isn't just personal, it's national in a way most of her peers on tour will never experience. A first-round loss at a smaller event barely registers for most players ranked in her range. For Eala, it can become a trending topic back home within hours. Handling that scrutiny without letting it visibly rattle her game is, on its own, a skill many far more experienced professionals never fully develop. There's also a simple statistical argument worth making. Across 2025 and 2026, combined, she has recorded wins over multiple top 10 opponents, a Grand Slam quarterfinal caliber run cut short only by a top 15 seed, and back-to-back title-level results on grass. Small samples of good tennis happen to a lot of players. Repeated results against elite competition, spread across more than a year and multiple surfaces, is a much harder thing to write off as coincidence. It's worth stepping back and asking why this particular athlete has captured the country's attention the way she has. The Philippines already has sporting heroes. Manny Pacquiao in boxing, Efren Bata Reyes in billiards, Carlos Yulo in gymnastics, Obiena in pole vault, Hidilyn Diaz in weightlifting. What Eala has done is bring that same intensity of national devotion to a sport that had essentially none of it before her. Filipino fans have reportedly stayed up well past midnight, night after night, just to watch matches that rarely if ever aired in a convenient time slot, because there was finally a reason to. That matters beyond just ratings and headlines. For the first time, young players across the Philippines and Southeast Asia more broadly have a concrete, living example of what's possible in a sport that used to feel closed off to athletes from the region. Tennis requires access, coaching, courts, travel budgets, junior circuits, that has historically been out of reach for most Filipino families. Eala's rise doesn't erase those structural barriers, but it does something almost as important. It proves the ceiling isn't fixed. A teenager watching her beat Iga Swiatek on Wimbledon's grass now has a real answer to the question of whether someone from their country can compete at that level. 2 years ago, the honest answer was, probably not. Today it's yes, and here's the proof. There's a symbolic detail in her own words that captures this well. Speaking about what drives her, Eala has said how proud she is to be Filipino, and that the flag stays at the center of everything she does on court. It's the kind of statement athletes often say without much weight behind it, but in her case it lines up with how she's actually spent her time off the court, showing up for national recognition events, engaging with fans who travel to see her, and treating the platform as something bigger than her own career. That combination of results and visible national pride is part of why comparisons to Pacquiao specifically, rather than to any other athlete, keep coming up. Pacquiao didn't just win fights. He became a unifying figure whose success felt like it belonged to the whole country. Analysts and fans alike are increasingly describing Eala's effect on the tennis-watching public in the same terms. Not just admiration for a skilled athlete, but a sense of collective ownership over her success. It also helps that her rise arrived at a moment when the Philippines was actively searching for its next great individual sporting story. Team sports dominate the conversation day to day, but the athletes who tend to leave the deepest mark nationally are usually the ones competing alone, on the biggest stages in the world, representing the country with no teammates to share the credit or the pressure. Pacquiao did it in the ring. Diaz did it on the weightlifting platform. Yulo did it on the gymnastics floor. Eala is doing it on a tennis court, in a sport where, until recently, most Filipinos couldn't have named a single active professional from their own country. So where does this go from here? Eala is 21 years old, sitting at a career-high ranking in the high 20s, with a Grand Slam fourth round, a WTA 1000 semifinal, wins over multiple top 10 players, and 2 WTA 125 level titles already on her resume, and by most tennis timelines, she is still approaching what should be her physical prime. The gap between career-high number 28 and the true elite tier of the sport is real, and closing it will require doing something she hasn't fully done yet, stacking deep runs at the biggest tournaments back-to-back, rather than alternating brilliant stretches with rough patches, as she did through the middle of 2026. But it's hard to look at the trajectory. Outside the top 130 in mid-2025, top 50 by year's end, a Grand Slam fourth round and a career-high top 30 ranking by mid-2026, and not see a player still climbing rather than one who has already peaked. Every major swing on the calendar has produced a new milestone. Every setback has been followed, fairly quickly, by an answer on the court. And every time the questions have gotten louder, she has quieted them the same way, not with a statement, but with a result. Whether her ceiling is a Grand Slam quarterfinal, a Grand Slam title, or a permanent place in the US top 10 is genuinely unknown, and anyone who claims certainty is guessing. What isn't in doubt is what she has already done to the record books of Philippine tennis. A sport with no real precedent for this kind of success now has a number one example, and the country's biggest sporting icon has publicly said what millions of Filipino fans have been feeling for over a year: pride, plain and simple. So here's the real question worth sitting with. Has Eala already delivered the signature moment of her career with that win over Iga Swiatek at Wimbledon, or is the biggest chapter of this story still ahead of her? Let us know what you think in the comments, and if you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss her next tournament.